In the early 1600s, settlers from England arrived on the shores of what is now the United States. They were willing to cross the hazardous ocean to escape a harsh government, to worship as they pleased, to start farms and build settlements. Some other immigrants, however, came against their will. They were captured in their homes in Africa, held aboard sailing ships for weeks on end, and forced to work as slaves on large plantations. From the 1700s until the Civil War, these two separate classes of immigrants built the American South into one of the richest growing regions in the world. This is the story of the great American plantations of the South and the slave labor that helped run them. The wide, fertile Mississippi River Delta attracted settlers from the very beginning. The river made it easy to move around, and the soil could grow just about anything. Since the beginning, tobacco was the chief crop of the South, but as early as 1607, planters raised cotton here too. Farming in the New World was a labor-intensive business. It took a lot of people to run a successful plantation. It soon became obvious there weren't enough European immigrants to work the large plantations, so many planters looked beyond the colonies for the workers they needed. Across the ocean in Africa, shrewd businessmen took advantage of what they saw as a golden opportunity. Arab slave traders kidnapped unsuspecting men, women, and children and sold them into slavery. Other blacks were captured by fellow Africans, who sold them to ship captains like a product. The first Africans were brought to America in 1619 by a Dutch ship captain who sold them to settlers in Jamestown. African slaves were separated from their friends and family. They were chained together and packed aboard sailing ships for the long and dangerous journey to the colonies. About 350,000 slaves were brought to America by ship during the 1700s. By 1860, there were 4 million slaves in the country. 1 out of every 3 people was a slave. A slave is a human being who is owned by another human being. Without pay and without any say, they must do what their owners, called masters, told them to, no matter what. The majority of whites did not own slaves. It was mainly the large plantations that depended on slave labor. There were generally 2 types of slaves. House slaves worked as servants. They were often better fed, clothed, and educated than those who worked at farming. Household slaves sometimes had close, affectionate relationships with the families who owned them. Most slaves lived in small cabins called the quarters, located near the work fields. They woke up before sunrise. After they made their own breakfast, they were called off to the fields by first light. They worked planting and picking cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane, as well as several other crops. After a brief break for food around noon, they worked again till nearly dark. They were often treated with suspicion and contempt. They were expected to be humble and not even look their owners directly in the eye. Slaves who challenged their master were severely punished. Slaves on the cotton plantations had to pick a certain weight of cotton every day under the brutal southern sun. If they failed, they were also punished. Slave owners had complete power over their slaves. Marriage was not legal among slaves. Any children born to them were considered the master's property. An owner could even break up families by selling family members to other owners. An owner could punish slaves by whipping them and insist they work even when they were sick or injured. But owners were in constant fear of slave rebellions. Any hint of disorder among slaves was quickly suppressed. Slavery didn't work well in the North, so it gradually died out there. But in the South, where the soil was rich and the land cheap, slavery grew. Farmers bought lots of land at low prices and, using the free labor of thousands of slaves, rapidly set up vast cotton-growing empires. But hand-picking the lint from the seed took so much labor that there was little profit in it. Then, in 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, making the separating process automatic. His machine could clean cotton as fast as 50 people working by hand. Suddenly, cotton was affordable, and it rapidly became America's most valuable export. By 1830, the South was the greatest cotton-growing area in the world. At harvest time, the steamboats on America's rivers were piled so high with cotton that only the boat's smokestacks were visible. To ship cotton to market, farmers would bring their crops out to one of thousands of landings all along the river. The first steamboat by would get the contract to carry his cotton. The trade in cotton made Southern growers wealthy. Fed by their money, they created an aristocracy never before seen in America. To show off their wealth, growers built imposing plantation homes. These homes were grand places, and each one was bigger and fancier than the next. They reflected the great wealth generated by cotton. Oakley House was one of the first plantation homes in Louisiana. It still stands today amid tall oak trees and dripping moss, very much like it did back in 1806 when it was built. This was the hub of a successful 3,000-acre cotton plantation. Today, archaeology students are sifting through generations of debris outside the plantation home, hoping to unearth clues to what life was like here in the past. They know that Oakley House was built during the Federal period and would have been the epitome of style at the time. This is where the owner and his family lived, so only the best furniture, artwork, and antiques were ever used in the house. In the South, plantation homes almost always had kitchens built away from the main house. Kitchens were a fire hazard, since cooking was done over open fires. It also kept the house cooler in the summertime. It was different out on the plantation. The barn was one of the most important places on any plantation, but it was never fancy. You needed a place to store your equipment, so every plantation had at least one barn. Antebellum plantation homes were much like castles were back in Europe. They were the nerve center of a very large working area. And slaves were very much like peasants were in Europe, working for the plantation owners like the peasants did for royalty, without getting paid. Not all white farmers were wealthy plantation owners. Many Southern farmers were just ordinary people who worked small tracts of land. Some owned a slave or two, but many did not. They worked in the fields right along with their slaves, from dawn to dusk. However, they owned the land they worked, and they kept the profits from the cotton they grew. A typical farmhouse was not like the great mansions. More than likely, a farmer lived in a modest two-room log house, and his children slept in a loft under the roof. His wife cooked daily at a big, smoky fireplace, working with an iron pot over an open fire. Life for most Southern farmers meant hard work and long hours for the whole family. Whether Southern farmers owned slaves or not, the practice of slavery was taken for granted. It was a way of life that many in the South simply accepted. Plantation owners didn't see anything wrong with slavery and couldn't understand why people outside the South wanted to abolish it. But a storm was gathering, the Civil War, and the idea of ending slavery would sweep through the Cotton Kingdom more powerfully than any blight ever could. After the Civil War, slavery was abolished. Since owners now had to pay for labor, the cost of growing cotton rose dramatically. Many of the great plantations were divided into smaller farms. Instead of slaves, the farms were now worked by tenant farmers. By the early 1900s, more than half of the tenant farmers became sharecroppers, sharing their profits with the landowners. Today, much of the land in the South is owned and farmed by large corporations. The old ways are long past. But 200 years ago, it was slave labor on the large southern plantations that helped build America into the most successful farming region the world had ever known.